Good morning, everybody, to Echo Voices. Today is January 15th. Our next session on February 5th is Emergency Preparedness for AAC, Essential Strategies. I'm very excited about this presentation because I saw it and reached out to them to bring it here to Oregon. Krista Davidson and Teresa Thompson will be presenting that. Today, we have Hanna Erickson, all the way from Minneapolis. She is from IRISBOND, and she's going to tell us about eye gaze and AAC, and she has a really amazing app wheel that I get asked for all the time. So I am so very happy to welcome you, Hanna, to Oregon to bring this information to us. So now I have something to give people when they ask me. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand it over to Hanna.
Yes, thank you so much for that introduction and for having me here. I'm very excited to share all of this with you. So let me just share my screen. And I'll tell you a little bit about IRISBOND and then the app wheel that we've developed for use of different apps with eye gaze. And kind of where that idea came from and how to use it as well. So yeah, I'll give you a little bit of information there. Oops. So as you said, my name is Hanna. I am in charge of the training and support here at IRISBOND. Mostly, I work with our partners in the US, but also centers, schools, hospitals, and end users and their families who are using eye gaze in their day-to-day through our training programs and through our feedback community, which is just a community of kind of training and support for testing our devices. So here's a little bit what I wanted to talk about today. Just like Chandra said, tell you a little bit about IRISBOND, the app wheel, kind of what you need to get started with eye tracking and how those are going to be relevant when using the app wheel. And then I thought we could do an activity like taking a look at how the app wheel can help you in different activities that you're doing with eye gaze. And then I have a few user stories to share about the different ways to use our eye tracker. So I wanted to start just with IRISBOND. At IRISBOND, we create technology in-house. So we are an eye gaze manufacturer. That means that we create the physical eye tracker. I have one here. I don't know if you can still see me, but we create this eye tracking technology and some and we have control over all of the kind of design that goes into it because on this team that you see in front of you is everything from our developer team to our SLP team. So we have kind of the both extremes. We have everything from that really techie side to the clinical side on our team in-house. And although I'm in Spain, or I'm in Minneapolis, our team is based in Spain. So most of the people that you see here are in Spain. But the good thing about that is that in Spain, we work directly with all of our AAC users. So we function as an AAC provider. And that means we are really close to the people that we work with, especially in those Spanish-speaking countries, which means we really want to be sensitive to the needs that the users are telling us about. So that's something we always try to keep at the forefront of our development. So we're always putting out improvements for our camera and our technology to make sure that it's working the best that it can for everyone. All right, so this is a little bit of a zoom view of our camera. Our camera is called Hiru. This is one of the first eye trackers that's supported in both iPad and Windows systems. So it was the first multi-platform eye tracker available, and the first one to be a standalone, or like an option that can be combined with different combinations of devices for both Windows and iPad. We have on there the iPad, like the Made for iPad certification. That's a little stamp of approval that that Apple gives to eye trackers that have gone through, or accessories for iPads that have gone through the process. All right. So I see that there's a couple things in the chat, so I'm gonna just go jump in there. But while I do that, I just wanted to join our Mentimeter. You can scan this QR code in order to join, or you can go to menti.com and put in your code that you have here. Once I switch over to that survey, you should be able to have access to it too. And I have just three really quick questions that I wanted to get a feel for how you guys are working with eye gaze up until now. See if I can find my little chat. There we go.
Most of what's in the chat is me putting
Technical.
things in there.
Okay, I see that now. All I can see is the little notifications of all the things coming up there. So, perfect. Okay, let's see. So it seems like you guys are able to join the survey, the Mentimeter. If you aren't or you don't have access, you can just shout out your answer too. That's totally fine. But yeah, I just wanted to get a feel for how much you guys are working with eye gaze already.
I did get to play with a couple of eye gaze machines that we have at the OTAP lending library, and that was so much fun. And I have such a good time showing it to people.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think there's it's pretty fun to get started with. It can be a little bit frustrating sometimes depending on how it's going, but yeah, that's really great that you guys have many of you have had a lot of experience, it looks like. Some people are a little bit new and some people haven't tried it yet. So I will try to give a little bit of everything. If everyone here is super experts, I'll jump over a couple things, but in this case, I will try to give a wide variety of information as we're introducing this. Sounds like people have, yeah, one or two students or just starting with eye gaze. Great. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. The next one is more about the operating system. So I mentioned that our eye tracker works in both Windows, so PCs, tablets, and also with iPad. So that's kind of the newer side, working with iPad. There are a few eye trackers out there now that work with the iPad, so there's a little bit more opportunity to try both. I didn't put this in here, but as people are as the answers are rolling in, of course, at IRISBOND, we make an external eye tracker, the hardware, but there are now some options out there for eye tracking, especially on the iPad, using the iPad's built-in camera. Apart from this question, has anyone used the built-in camera of the iPad for eye tracking? No. Okay. If you have iOS 18, that's the newest version of iPad OS. You can try it. I can show you how to do that at the end of the session. It's worth trying out, I think, to get an idea for what's out there. Today, I will mostly focus on anything that we talk about with iPad. I'll mostly focus on using our eye tracker, but a lot of the tips that I have for using eye tracking with different apps will apply to our eye tracker and other eye trackers that are out there, including the iPad one. Okay, great. And then I have one more question here. This is thinking about the apps that you're using, whether it's in iPad or Windows. I want to know what you guys look for when you're selecting an app for an eye gaze user. What's the first thing that you're thinking, okay, this is the most important. This user needs XYZ. I need to find that in the app. What features are you looking for? Are you looking for, yeah, I'll let you guys answer before I ask. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. These are in the chat we have user friendly and cost. Compatibility cost looks like is an important one for people. Easy setup, that's really, really important. as well as ease of calibration, being able to change it for different levels of vision. That's important for sure. Having that CVI friendly option is going to be super important. The customization and the number of clicks, super important. Yeah, you want this to be easy. You want this to be fast for the users. Okay, another one for high contrast in the chat. Okay. Okay, vocab sets. I think that's important, having the right age-appropriate option for people. Okay, and I think that this is mostly focused on communication, I'm guessing, from what I'm seeing here with the language vocab sets. Having a good camera, having a good robust system. Yeah, sometimes the compatibility of the camera is going to depend on which app you use. And then compatibility across platforms, also really important. I know that at IRISBOND, we find that as a really important piece. So nice. I can come back to this in a minute when if you guys add anything else here, or if you have any other ideas, you can continue to add them to the chat. But I'm going to jump back over here. A couple of things that I've heard from people prior to this session about what you want to pay attention to or keep in mind when choosing an app for eye gaze is things like accessibility. So how big of a grid setup, or how big are the cells going to be when a student or a user is working with eye gaze? Cell spacing as well, kind of how accessible are those buttons? Personalization, can you change the color? Can you change the pointer color and the size? Things like that. The language models or the language sets available. And then a lot of people ask me about accessible apps. So apart from having just that communication keyboard and that option there, what apps, what else can they do outside of that? Can they use accessible versions of YouTube or Instagram or their email, things like that? Okay, so what we aim to do with the app wheel is to design a little bit of a very visual version of the wide array of apps that you can use with eye tracking, especially with an eye tracker that works in both operating systems that we mentioned. So the app wheel, you should be able to see it better here. The app wheel is separated out. On the left-hand side, you have Windows apps, or on the right-hand side, you have iPad apps. So in the middle, the green area, you have apps that are available on both sides, and that you can use across platforms. What I think is important as we are looking at the different types of apps is keeping in mind that there are different types of apps that people want to use with eye gaze. There's a lot of different goals that people have when they're using eye gaze. Some people are just looking for their main communication device, and they might use a dedicated device for that. But others are looking for more than that, or something different. Some people just need access to their device, or distance communication. Right, so using that, using WhatsApp, using iMessage or email might be more important for that one person than the main communication device. But also, people need to be able to use their eye tracker for education, skill building, and also access to entertainment. Depending on the user, you might need more or less of one of these areas. So as you can see, there's a really wide variety of different apps that are shown on the app wheel. And when you do go to this resource on our website, which I'll share with you guys at the end, every time you click on one of these icons, it's going to take you to that app so you can see what it's all about. When you're looking at the app wheel, so if you're looking at the app wheel and you say, okay, I know that MindExpress has a really great language set that I want to use with this student, and I know they want to use Windows, I can use MindExpress. There might be some things you want to have in mind as you're taking a look at each individual app. So you want to, once you've selected an app and you want to set it up for the user, you want to keep in mind the different user type that's going to be taking time with this app. So I like to separate this kind of into two areas, but of course you can separate it into more categories apart from this. But you have an early stage user that's kind of dependent on a communication partner or therapist to help guide them through the interaction with the eye tracking. But you might, on the other hand, have a very independent eye gaze user whose goals are to make everything possible with just on their own without the outside assistance of a communication partner for accessing their whole device. So having your user type in mind is very important when setting up your system for eye tracking. But also for each app, you're going to have potentially some different setups and configurations that you'd like to have in mind. Okay, I'll show you a couple videos to see what are some things that you can do with eye tracking and how to start getting set up. As I'm doing that, I'm just taking a look at the chat really quick, talking about some of the questions that you have. Sounds like some of them are getting answered, so I will come back to them in a moment. But I first wanted to show you a couple of examples of things you can do with eye tracking. This one is an example of your main, probably your most popular, let's say, goal in AAC for eye tracking, which is just using your communication system. Here, I'm just using Proloquo to introduce myself.
A H. Hi, I am Hanna.
So that's kind of one main use for eye tracking. And then the other one that I want to show you goes a little bit further. So it's going to not only talk about, or not only show visuals of how to use a communication device with eye tracking, but also kind of the whole range of steps that you would need to go through in order to start using eye tracking. So I wanted to show this just because it gives you an idea for the first steps of eye tracking, which we'll get to in a minute. But the user in this video is first doing a calibration with the eye tracker, which is going to be pretty universal across eye trackers and across apps, but you may adapt the number of calibration points that you might want to use depending on what your goals are with a certain app. For example, if you're using an app with really big buttons, you might only need a 1 or 5 point calibration, whereas if you're using an app and the eye tracker for access to more complicated tasks, you might need a higher number of calibration points. This second example is talking about some early stage games that someone might be able to use with the eye tracker. All of these are on the iPad, by the way. That's just the example that we used. You can see that we are first using the eye tracker to work with this Dilbert the Dog cause and effect game, and then chat about it. I'm going to jump forward to show you a couple other options. So here our user is searching for something on the internet. So they're using Safari, using an internet browser. And today I'm showing all this range of examples so that we can show how to later personalize the system to make it easier to do each of these activities. So that's kind of a more complicated task, right? There, she's having to scroll down the page. She's having to type different things using her iPad keyboard, and then she's having to navigate to her next app. So she's able to do all of these things with just the eye gaze. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit because I wanted to show you one other example, which I think could be very useful for people. And that is the example of home control, home automation. So in this example, she's using HomeKit. Or she might have just left it. HomeKit is iPad's, sorry about that. HomeKit is iPad's home control app. So here she's talking about being able to use the eye tracker to turn out a lamp on and off. So I just want to show you that one, and then we'll be done with this piece. Okay, so yeah, she's turned the light on and off with the eye tracker. So as you can imagine, a lot of these things can be pretty easy, on the easier end or on the more difficult end to do with eye tracking. So I think it's important to have in mind that we can do all sorts of things with eye tracking, but we need to adapt the system to make it work for each individual user profile. Okay, I'm going to go back to the chat just now and catch up with a couple of things now that we got through kind of the range of apps. Okay, so someone was asking about eye gaze, like games for eye gaze training. Sorry, my video is still going there. So people were asking about games for eye gaze training. I will definitely show you a couple of games that you can use to skill build with eye tracking. So I'll have that one coming up soon. There's some really good apps in both Windows and iPad to do that with. I see you guys were mentioning having multiple calibration points. I also will talk about that a little bit more in detail depending on what app we're looking at. And then someone asked, lastly, if Blink is the person in the video's selection method. In this case, she was using just dwell. So she, I think, had it set to probably a little bit less than 1 second for the selection method. Last question I see on here was, what platform did you have the games on for the person to select from? In the video we saw with Dilbert the dog, the one where she was just playing a very simple cause and effect game, that was Grid for iPad. And we'll look at that one in a little more detail too. All right. So are there any other questions so far, of just kind of overview of like IRISBOND and the types of apps you can use? We'll get into them in a little more detail too, but.
Feel free to unmute if you guys have questions that you want to ask Hanna.
All right. Well, I'll move on because I wanted to share a little bit about the essentials for eye tracking, the things you want to keep in mind, and then we'll get into the app wheel in more detail. So, my click always goes just a few seconds later than me. I'm too fast. There we go. Okay, so the essentials that I wanted to point out for eye tracking, for those of you who maybe are newer to eye tracking, is that we want to make sure that that you're starting from a good position. So for eye tracking, it's really important to have in mind the calibration. I know we've mentioned that briefly already, but the calibration is a really, really important starting point for anyone starting with eye tracking. Positioning affects how well the eyes are detected and how well the system interprets where the person is looking. So having a good positioning where your eyes are in front of the camera and then doing the calibration that's appropriate to the activity is really important. So when you guys were mentioning at the beginning that you want some options for being able to use high contrast colors on the calibration or engaging content, that's really important when you're doing that calibration. For our system, in both Windows and in iPad, we do have multiple options for the calibration. So in all of our apps or any compatible apps with our eye tracker, you should be able to do a 1, 5, 9, or 16-point calibration. So you have a lot of different options, and you can change the colors to make them the engaging colors that the student wants, or visible colors for the student or for the user. Next, we have navigation tools. Navigation tools are really important in any system that you're using with eye tracking. For the iPad, you're going to use what we call assistive touch. So for those of you that have used that before, it is a menu with different options on it that you can select. So in the video, we saw how the user selected some options and then she scrolled down, for example. She selected that scroll option from the assistive touch menu. That's our tool that we're going to be using for iPad. And then for Windows, on the Windows side, we don't necessarily have that assistive touch tool, but the navigation tool depends on the app that you're using. So if you use a computer control app like Windows Eye Control, you'll have a different set of navigation tools than if you're using something like Grid 3, which includes things like accessible apps and computer control. And yeah, don't worry, I'll give you some examples of all of these things. Lastly, another essential piece for eye tracking in different apps is the feedback and selection information. So when you click on something or when you're looking around the screen when using eye tracking, you're getting some visual and sometimes some audio feedback. So you want to make sure that the feedback that you're getting, the visual feedback that you're getting, is matching what the user needs. So for example, some early stage users, when they first get started using eye tracking, if they're looking for a certain stimulus and you're indicating that they want to see to look to a certain stimulus on the screen, if you have a visible pointer or cursor following your eyes around the screen, that's going to be really distracting for some people. So being able to have the power to take that visual feedback away is going to be really important. For other users, it's really important to see where they're looking at all times so that you can help guide them and work with them. So in that case, you want to have the visual feedback be very bright and visible for everyone that's either using the eye tracking or assisting. So those are 3 areas that we want to keep in mind when we're personalizing an app for someone using eye gaze. Here I go into a little bit more detail about each of the essentials. I think I have these in the handout, so you can take a look at those different essentials when it comes to eye tracking and how they're separated out for iPad, which I indicated with the little Apple symbol, and Windows with the PC symbol. So there's a lot of personalization you guys can do in both areas and by app. All right, so for the app wheel itself, I mentioned that we have a lot of like a wide range of different apps here. So I thought that we could kind of go through them and just show how the app wheel is going to help you use an app and get more out of each app. So I took an example of, I don't know if I have it. It's in the games area. This will be on the iPad side, and it'll be on the learning games area under education and fun. This is the sensory activity center. This is the one I'm just going to use as an example to get started. So this app for iPad is not necessarily made for AAC, but it can be used for AAC and for some learning style games with eye tracking. So when you get started with this app, you can see that by default, the iPad has just a single tap as its default action. And as we've been talking about it, you can see we've done a few clicks, but it's not the most engaging activity because you're just doing a simple single click as you are looking around the screen. So these are images of people using eye gaze using the app. But with a simple change, which is selecting an action that's different from the default, I selected an action called hold and drag in order to make this change. And now you can see how much more engaging the app is for the student. And depending on the student's level or the eye gaze user's level as they are working with eye gaze, you can set up the iPad for the communication partner to select this action for them or for the user to do it themselves. So you can personalize it that way as well. So you can just see these are 2 examples of times you might use hold and drag to make the use of the app a little bit easier. Here's an example of the information that you'd get when you click on any of the apps inside the app wheel, and a little bit of like comments showing what each piece is. The great thing about the detailed information here is that we have guides onto what all of these terms mean, and I can answer the questions on what these terms are in this session too. But if you select a certain app from the app wheel, what you'll find is a description and a guide for how to use the app with eye gaze. So in this case, you have your sensory activity center, which is made for kind of getting that cause and effect early stage sensory game. But sometimes what I see is that when people first take an app, they think, oh, it's not going to be that fun for the user, or it's not going to be that engaging. But with these small changes, it can be. So here we have indications for all the different things we would recommend activating or doing in order to get the most out of this app.
I had a question about hot corners. That's a new term that I've not heard before.
Okay.
What does that mean exactly? How does that function?
Yeah, I'll show you some examples now so that you can see it visually. But there's a few different items here, which I kind of skipped over, so I'll jump back to really quick, that I think that are very relevant especially for the iPad. So I know that I'm really tending to talk a little bit more about the iPad in this presentation. It's because it's the newer area. But basically, hot corners are another tool that you can use for navigation in the iPad. So the first one I talked about for the iPad side was assistive touch. That's this menu here that you can see in black, and it has these different options on it. This menu is totally customizable, and you can make it have only one option, or you can expand it to having 9 or 8 options. Some of these options go into second level menus. For example, this dwell menu, if you click on it, it'll open into a menu that has more options just specifically for eye gaze. So things like pausing the dwell, turning the dwell back on, setting the visual feedback, things like that are going to be inside that dwell menu. And then you have other actions that you'll need to navigate through, things like scrolling up, things like device. This will help lead you to a menu where you can turn the volume up, turn the volume down, things like that, or shortcuts that you can jump to different apps. The hot corners are kind of like an extension of this assistive touch menu, and you can place extra actions that you want to be extra easily accessible in a corner. So all I would have to do is look, if I had my lower left-hand corner of the screen set to pause my eye gaze, pause my dwell, what I could do is just look into this corner, and then I would pause the dwell immediately without having to select any item from my assistive touch menu. So these are some accessibility tools that exist in Apple's world that don't exist in the Windows world, at least in the same way. So there are a lot of extra tools on the iPad side that are going through Apple and not necessarily going through the individual communication app that you're working with. So going back to our kind of example here, on the assistive touch menu, we've mentioned that it's good to have this hold and drag action. You might want a custom gesture for this app, which we can look at how to do. And then you also have these custom actions. So custom actions are actions that the communication partner can do. They're like little shortcuts, like if you double tap on the screen or you long press on the screen with a physical touch, then you can activate these different actions. So for example, if I double tap on the screen when my eye gaze user is working with it, with eye gaze, I can pause the eye gaze so that they don't accidentally click on things while we're navigating through different apps or something like that. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but based on just to respond to your question about the hot corners, in a lot of apps that are meant for early stage use or those first steps in skill building, we do recommend not using any hot corners because they can be accidentally clicked on and the user might not know why. So this is something that we recommend for kind of our second level of skill building or for independent users, whereas for early stage, just people getting started learning how to use eye tracking, we recommend keeping those off, at least at the beginning. So what I thought we could do is take a look at some different apps that we have on the app wheel in detail, and I have a few videos I can show you so you can get an idea for how they work. All I want to point out here before we jump into that is just that the cool thing about eye tracking is that in both operating systems of Windows and iPad, we have ways that you can do full computer control. So we what we want to do with this is just encourage people to use that full device control to open up doors to people. Don't think, oh, this app is too hard to use or this app's not possible to use. To spend some time trying to adapt these the settings of the different systems so that you can use it, because we want the things to be as accessible as possible. So I thought we could spin the wheel. I don't have a physical wheel or anything, but I have a few options that we can check in more detail for how to check on this on the different apps. Yes. Okay. So, whoops. Here we go. Why don't we start with let's do YouTube, because I think here I have a good example of what we can use for things like hot corners. So here, when I clicked on the area of the adapted app wheel that I have for you guys in this presentation, it brought us to our example for YouTube. So I've included here YouTube and YouTube Kids because both are really good options for use with eye gaze. A lot of these recommendations are geared more towards the Apple side, but you can apply some of them also to Windows for eye gaze control. We recommend turning what's called Snap to Item on. This is a visual feedback feature, which I'll show you in a second. We also recommend showing auto hide, turning auto hide on. Or making the cursor invisible. So if you're using Windows, make the cursor invisible. If you're using iPad, you can make the cursor invisible by using what's called auto hide. So auto hide is a feature that will help you it'll reduce distractions while the user is using eye gaze, because they won't see their cursor. So if they're trying to watch a video, it's better to not see the cursor floating around as you're watching the video. We recommend using a pretty quick dwell time if you're using YouTube, because it has a lot of small buttons, so it makes it easier to click on things. And then with our hot corners, we recommend giving the option for people to turn Snap to Item and auto hide on and off. I wanted to show you a video here. I've added one more hot corner to this video, and I'm using YouTube Kids. So I'll kind of narrate as we go through the video. So what this person is doing is opening YouTube Kids and clicking on the video in order to start the video. But what we see here is that the cursor is still visible, and it's kind of distracting when you're watching the video. So what the person did was go up to the upper left-hand corner, and they paused their dwell. So now, although you can see the cursor still in this video, the eye gaze is paused and the dwell is not activated. So as they were looking at the screen, they didn't accidentally stop the video. Have you guys used YouTube at all with eye tracking devices on iPad or on Windows?
Tried it once and it was interesting. It wasn't recently, but it was interesting.
Okay, yeah, that's what I hear a lot with YouTube.
Control.
What was that?
Yes, it's hard for students to control because they're looking at the video and it pauses it, so it frustrates them.
Okay, so yeah, one thing I would recommend trying is adding that pause action, or trying to pause the eye gaze once the video is started. The other thing is in iPad, when we use what I talked about with auto hide, I think I have a video for auto hide. When we talked about with auto hide, if you turn on this auto hide feature, what it does is it causes a delay in your click and your dwell time. So if you set the auto hide time really high, what that's going to do is it's going to make the cursor disappear, and it's not going to come back unless you really unless you deactivate it, which you can do in a hot corner, or you dwell on something for a longer time. In this example, I've said 4 seconds, which is a longer one. But that keeps you from doing some accidental clicks, in addition to using a pause icon. Okay, I've heard, it sounds like some people have used YouTube maybe on other systems. So the good thing about YouTube is these are some options for if you're just using the standalone app or going to the YouTube website. But if you are using something like Grid 3 or Mind Express and using those accessible apps within a communication app, then you have some more options for making it a little bit easier to use. But this would be if you don't have access to one of those accessible apps. Sorry. Okay, let's go to another app. I'm sorry, I wrote ProLoquo for text, but I meant to write ProLoquo. So ProLoquo is one of the ones that I had on here for an example. You guys might be familiar with ProLoquo, I would guess. This is a pretty easy one to use with eye tracking. This is an iPad app, and it's used for symbol and some text communication. So it can be a really nice one to use for eye tracking. And here are the tips that we would give to people using ProLoquo. So we'd turn snap to item on, which I'll show you in the next video. We would recommend turning auto hide on so that the person is not being distracted by their visible cursor. We recommend a shorter dwell time once someone knows what the layout is of the text that they're going to see on screen. But we probably wouldn't recommend using too many hot corners. Again, if it's the first time someone's using eye tracking, maybe don't lead with the hot corners, but start only after they've gotten the hang of the eye tracking. Once they have, if you are going to use hot corners, for this app, we recommend using only the bottom corners because there's a lot of buttons on the top of the ProLoquo screen that might accidentally get clicked. Then we also recommend using one of the cells in the ProLoquo area to set the assistive touch menu, which I'll show you in a future video. With this video, I wanted to show you what I've been talking about with snap to item. Okay, so as you can see, we saw this video before.
Hi.
Oops. So I'm just going to pause it for a second. So the video that we're seeing here is showing how to use eye tracking with ProLoquo, but we're also showing how to use snap to item. So snap to item is what I was talking about before, which is the visual feedback that the system is giving you when you look around the screen. So you can see here that in this video, whenever I look at a clickable cell, it will highlight it in blue. That's the activated version of the snap to item. But you'll see that if I look at any non-clickable area, so this white space either here or on the side of the screen, you're going to see that the cursor, the pointer, appears as a little circle. So when I'm talking about snap to item being on and off, this is what I'm talking about. Snap to item is when the cell is highlighted and your eye goes directly to the middle of the cell. And snap to item being disactivated would be when you have that pointer floating around on the screen. So let's just watch that again with that explanation. So you can see in some areas you have that visual pointer floating around. And when things are clickable, you're able to highlight the cells a little bit easier. For most communication apps, we do recommend using a cell highlight. So if it's an iPad, using snap to item, and if it's in Windows, making sure that you have the cell highlighted, and it draws your eye into the middle of it.
A,
Does that make sense? That feature, that visual feedback piece?
I think it does.
A,
Oops. Is that something you guys normally change? Those of you who have used a lot of eye tracking, is that something you guys play around with within the communication apps that you're using? Okay, yeah, sounds like it's definitely something some of you saw that was possible and some of you weren't sure about it. Yeah, I would definitely recommend. So I know most of you guys said, maybe the majority said you were familiar with Windows than more so than iPad. In the Grid 3 settings, the Grid 3 or Mind Express settings, you can adjust that. And I would really recommend playing around with that, especially for users that might get distracted or have maybe have a little bit of trouble with accuracy. So maybe they have a little bit of offset, right? Maybe it's hard for them to click on things. This cell highlight can help. So I'll go to a Windows app so that we can see what recommendations we have for a communication app in Windows. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mind Express. It's very similar to Grid 3, and it is a kind of grid layout of a communication app. And they have a lot of really great language sets within it. So they work a lot with like having a lot of wide variety of language sets. So what I've put here, I know there's a lot of information for Mind Express, but we have a recommendation for an independent user with all of these recommendations here. And then on the upper right-hand corner, you see that we have Mind Express extra tips for early stage users. So for the independent user, I would point out a couple of the things we recommend. For getting started with someone who wants access to their full device, we would make sure that the camera is, that you're using a good positioning guide. So you have the camera image there and you can check where the eyes are and how well they're positioned. And for the calibration, you can see that we recommend using a fast calibration, which has 9 or 16 points. And that's because what I talked about before with the independent user, we want to make sure that they have really high accuracy. And often an independent user that wants full access to their device is capable of doing that 9 or 16 point calibration without too much of a challenge. To continue the independent like recommendations that we have here for Mind Express, we recommend the dwell time about 1 second. And then the dwell indicator, which is that visual feedback I was talking about. In addition to having a border on the cell, we also recommend that it's a shrinking dot. So it draws your eye into the center of the cell. When you go into these, like on our website, when you go into these recommendations, it'll link to information on how to set these things up. So it'll have information like this where it says menu, settings, access, eye tracking. So you'll always find the route to adjust these things in the guide. On the other hand, if you're working with Mind Express for a very early stage user, it's a really nice thing to, a lot of times in communication apps, activate things like activity logs and heat maps. So heat maps are a visual representation of where the user looked throughout the activity that you're doing. This can be very helpful for understanding and analyzing the activity that you've done with a student or with an early stage user. So I know there's a ton of information on each of these pages, but the reason I wanted to kind of do this as like a little taste of all of the different options and apps that you have available. I'm happy to show a couple more. Are there any that appear in blue that you guys want to dive into? So from our app wheel. If not, I'll just choose another one.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute if anybody wants to see anything in particular. Touch chat. Deborah would like to see touch chat.
Perfect. Touch chat is a good one. So I'll jump to touch chat. I know touch chat is super popular as a iPad app. And so with Touch Chat, we would recommend the following items. So the first one is to have that snap to item turned on. Touch Chat, as you guys know, is only an iPad, so we only put iPad recommendations on this one. So we recommend using snap to item, having that on, that cell highlight. Also having auto hide turned off so that you can see the cell highlight and see the cursor. So hot corners. If someone is at the level of using hot corners, we recommend putting the hot corners in the lower part of the screen, because as you can see at the top of the screen here in like on Touch Chat's layout, you have a lot of stuff going on. Like this upper right hand corner has an X. You don't want to have too many things going on in the areas that the hot corners are. So what we would recommend doing is putting something like pause the dwell in the lower right hand corner. And then we have an extra tip here in this last point where it says for eye gaze skill building, indicate the hot corner pause using a customized button and symbol. So the cool thing about Touch Chat and a lot of the grid-based software options is that you can edit the different cells that are on a user's vocab set. So if you have, if one of the things you're working on in addition to the communication is learning how to use eye tracking to navigate through the iPad, this can be a great way to get someone started with that and learn this skill, because you have this cell here indicating, look into my corner, look into the lower left-hand corner in order to rest or to pause the eye gaze, so that you can set up the eye gaze, the hot corner to pause, and then indicate it inside of your Touch Chat app. So you're integrating both the settings that you're going to set up for the system with the communication app that the user is using. So this is one example of that, but there's lots of different ways that you can adapt the grid-based editable options to the settings that you have for eye gaze. Another way that you can do this is another idea on this page is until now we've been seeing that assistive touch menu, the black menu with the options on it, the toolbar, the tool menu. It is possible to move that around the screen because it's kind of floating. It's just waiting. When it's not in use, it's floating somewhere on the screen. But what we find is that sometimes it can be distracting for students. So if you don't want to use the hot corner yet, you're not ready for the hot corner, but you want to use, get someone ready for the skill of using the assistive touch menu, you could move the menu to a customized cell and use it as the icon in the middle of the cell. You could say, toolbar or select an action, and then the assistive touch menu can float right here over this cell, and then it can be edited with the label that you want to give it. So those are a couple ideas of what you can do there. I'll jump to one other that I think is kind of nice for some fast success. So what we find in a lot of early stage users or people just getting started with eye tracking, we want tools for fast success. So the Hiru app, which is actually an app from IRISBOND, it's our calibration app that you saw in the first video of where the person was doing the calibration. We've added inside of that app an option for a game for very fast success, and it's called our balloon game. Basically, the calibration is hidden within this game. And so every time you're looking at the different balloons here, you're actually doing a calibration, but the user doesn't necessarily know that it's happening. So it's kind of nice to skip over that sometimes traumatic step of doing the calibration, and still give you the accuracy that you need. But it can also just be used as a game that's going to give you really fast cause and effect, fast success. We made it extra easy to click on these buttons with eye gaze, even if you don't have the best calibration or something, so that people can be really quick about learning that when I look over here, something happens. So yeah, the visualization and the audio is adjustable. So you right now you can't hear the audio, but there can be sounds or not. And then you can also track the progress because that gives you a score at the end of the game. So that's kind of nice for some evaluation because, you know, it's important to have that piece there. Let's see if there's any others I'd want to highlight. I would encourage you guys to just kind of take a look at all of these. Like I said, I only put a small, like smattering of ones that we could show here, but there's a lot of different things that you can do on these different apps. Nice, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna jump away from our wheel and go on to our next piece here, which will be very, very quick. So in addition to the guides that we have for each individual apps, we do have some tips for how to set up for certain users. So just in general, like if you have an early stage user that's just getting started with eye gaze, we'd recommend these types of settings. Or if you're working with an independent user, we'd recommend these types of settings and a bunch of tricks, things like how to set up your home screen like this on an iPad to make it easier for people, all of that good stuff. So those are kind of housed next to our app guide. We have one for iPad and one for Windows. Okay, and then let's see, before I go into the next piece, let's see if there's any questions. Oh, someone just jumping off. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight a couple things with the different users that we have. We have a couple of videos. Beware this might get stuck in your head, but we have a few people that have been starting with using iPad and Windows for their eye gaze access method. So we'll look first at Dulce.
I am the best. I am so cute, strong, messy, and brave. I am a smile, head of a child. I am free. I am a girl. I am a boy. I am a writer. I am love. I am the sunshine. I am fun. I am free. I am friendly. I am none so. I am free. I am.
So I wanted to highlight Dulce's journey just because she has been using eye tracking for a lot of her life. She is 13 now, but she has been using eye tracking since she was 6 years old, and she's definitely gone through a wide range of the apps or the types of apps that we saw today. So she started from the time she was really young with very kind of early stage apps, thinking about things like that Dilbert the dog cause and effect game that we saw at the beginning, some of the inclusive eye gaze learning curve games that we had on Windows. And she started understanding how to skill build with that eye gaze, with the eye tracker at a very young age. And then moved from there to symbol communication in Grid for using Grid 3. So that's one of the apps that is on our wheel. And from there, she eventually started using primarily text to speech. So using text communication. And you saw in the video there that she was using predictable for her communication. And so now she uses a variety of communication-based apps for which would be predictable. And if she's using her Windows device, she'll use Grid 3 for that communication. But then she also uses apps that are not built for eye tracking or not built with eye tracking in mind. Things like that, like makeup app that she has. She loves like being able to work with iPad apps that aren't necessarily made with adaptability or accessibility in mind, but they can be adapted to use with her eye gaze. So I think that she's a really good example of someone who's been gone through the kind of that whole range. And then I have one more that I want to show you. I won't show you all three. But Edgar is another eye gaze user from our side. In Spain, of course.
the dreamer, I am the book, I am the writer, I am love, I am sunshine, I am fun, I am free, I am brilliant, I am not so, I'm a citizen of the world, I can do more than you, I am free, I am free, I am.
So Edgar is an awesome person that is in our community here in Spain, and he works with the eye tracker purely for access. So he has been able to use his eye tracker to access all of his university work, the apps that they use to work with different things in his university schoolwork, and he is a university student now. And he doesn't use it for speech because he has verbal speech, but he's able to keep up with his classes and everything using the eye tracker. He's also an example of someone who's used eye tracking in both Windows and the iPad. All right, so I'm going to jump to the next one. I'll let you watch Gemma's video on our website if you want, but just for the sake of time, I wanted to just share with you about our partners in the US. So I didn't ask this at the beginning, but I wasn't sure if you guys knew too much about IRISBOND at the beginning or before this session. But as I said before, we are an eye tracking manufacturer, so we make that eye tracker. And what that means in the US is that we work exclusively through partners. So you probably recognize some of the partners that are on the screen here, but you'll notice that the one thing that each of these devices from our partners have in common is that it has our same eye tracker on the bottom. Right? So we have our eye tracker here in combination with these different cases for Windows and for iPad options. So I heard someone at the beginning, I saw in the chat that they were asking a little bit about like how easy is it to get funding for different types of devices, for eye tracking and all of that. The answer is a little bit that it depends on the device you're using. But in the partners that you see here on the screen, there is a variety of devices that are defined as dedicated devices for communication. So those would fall under that funding system, that typical funding system that you would go through to get a dedicated device for someone's communication. And then there are other devices that are a little bit more flexible that maybe fall outside of that dedicated devices category, but are more focused on giving people access. So there's some people like Edgar who don't need a dedicated communication device, but they do still need access. So there are some more flexible options on this screen that have that are not in that dedicated device category, but more for access. So in general, the main one that is more thought of for access and is a little bit like easier on the price tag is the PRC Saltillo device, which is called the Versa Eye. This is an iPad option that allows you to bring your own iPad. So if I have an iPad already and I just want to add the eye tracking access method to it, I can get the Versa Eye casing, and then I can use my own iPad and whatever apps that I have on my iPad already and use that as my eye tracking access method. The other options via RM Speech, Control Bionics, Forbes, and Talk to Me, those all are candidates for dedicated device funding. And so through each of these partners, you can get that funding help and set up for anyone interested in those dedicated devices. I've indicated on the bottom if they have options for Windows or iPad, because some of them only have Windows and some of them only have iPad, but many of them have both.
Hannah, I would just like to add that we do have Community Vision coming to do a session for Echo Voices on February 19th, specifically talking about funding for speech generating devices. So if you guys are interested in that piece, they've done that session before, and they were kind enough to repeat it for Echo Voices. And then just a quick question, does IRISBOND have any hand in helping people through the funding part, or do you guys kind of rely on the other companies to do that with the AAC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, it's the second option. We rely on our partners to support users through that funding process. And that's just because our eye tracker is just a component piece of all of these systems that you see below. And all of our partners are experts in that area. So they take care of supplying a trial device to people that need it for that funding process, helping you guys select a device, and supporting you after the purchase. So we support our partners. As I said, I'm kind of the partner training and support lead. So I am supporting our partners to make sure that you guys have all the updated information, or anyone that's purchasing a device through them has that.
That makes sense.
Of course, if you have questions, you can also come to me about anything. We have our own knowledge base for with these guides on it and everything.
Awesome.
Yeah. So lastly, just to kind of wrap up here, you can contact me, like I said, if you have any questions or have any comments or whatever you want to follow up with. But I also put a QR code on here for, and I can add it to, I'll add it to the chat just now, for access to our guides. Normally, these app guides, the detailed app guides that I showed you, those will be accessible normally for people that have gone through one of our training programs or have gone through our feedback community, which is our loan device program. But since you guys are participating in the webinar, you guys can get access to the guides for this month and be able to check out all the different guides that you want to check for the different apps. Let me add this
for that.
so you guys can sign up there. It'll just be a quick form. But yeah, that's, I think, it for me, unless you guys have any other questions. And it was really great being able to participate with you guys.
This has been really informative. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I apologize earlier. I did not have the permissions set correctly, but the Google Drive is available for everyone. You can grab these slides, which are chock full of so much good stuff. And then, of course, it's also on the iEcho platform, and we'll get this up on YouTube so you guys can watch it again if you want to, and share it, of course. Does anybody have any questions before we go?
I'll just add in here our training resources so that you guys can have access to that too, if you are interested in more detailed training on any of these topics.
And I'm going to save the chat and see if I can't get those links thrown into YouTube and into the Google Drive as well.
So thank you.
This has been great. Thank you so much, Hannah. And look, you're on time, so that's awesome. We always like that, right? We are also very busy, and I know you all have more meetings and more kiddos to help, and we're here for questions. If you have questions, please reach out to me. If you need to get a hold of Hannah and you can't find it, I'll dig it up for you.
And I just want to say too that Chandra and I are heading to the ATIA conference in Orlando at the end of the month. I know Hanna and many other vendors will. That term just has a connotation. Exhibitors, suppliers, partners is the term I'd like to use.
Yes.
Hannah, lots of other AT and AAC partners will be there. So if there are devices or tools that you would like us to check out, folks who are still online, please let us know and we'll do a little side by side with the vendors and even a little video if they'll let us. So we're here to bring you what you need. Kelly Fauner, I appreciate it. I'm so looking forward to seeing you. And Kelly will also be at our AT Ties conference at April 7th and 8th. So what a great community we have here. Chandra, thank you for leading us.